the flag bearer, has been explaining what he will do when he comes to power. He has hinted that his government will pursue a regime accountability agenda to retrieve stolen state funds lost to corruption. He, however, adds his appointees will not be left off the hook if found culpable. John Mahama, who made these comments in his interaction with the clergy, said this will form part of the new standards his government will introduce in fighting corruption.
Cases that I could cite, SML, there are so many of them, but I guess if I wanted to go through all of them, we will not leave here today. I make a firm promise to you, my Christian fathers, that the administration that I'll lead will set a new standard in the fight against corruption. We will fight the canker of corruption and defeat it. We'll retrieve stolen monies. We'll retrieve stolen monies and hold people in government accountable. But we're not going to pursue just regime accountability. The norm has been that it is only the past government that you hold accountable for any acts of corruption. But we will ensure that those in our government who are also indulged in corruption will be held accountable. And so we will not go witch hunting just the past, we won't go witch hunting the past government. If people have been involved in malfeasance, they must be held to account. And if people in our administration also follow the same path, they must also be held to account. It is only that way we'll be able to get a handle on the canker of corruption.
We heard the NDC flag bearer, John Mahama. His aide, Joyce Bawumia, is still with us. And I've also been joined by Richard Ahiagba, who is Communications Director of the NPP. Grateful for your time, Mr. Ahiagba, for joining. Now, let me start with you, Joyce Bawumia. Mr. Mahama is actually seeking power for the second time. In his first administration, there were some of his appointees that were tagged with corruption acts. I mean, the Jida saga, the Utomba saga, and a host of others still fresh in our minds. What really did he do in terms of dealing with these issues for us to believe him that he will really pursue a regime accountability agenda if re-elected?
Let me first and foremost indicate that I don't want us to keep nitpicking. Indeed, if you look at the record of our attempts at fighting corruption, Mr. Mahama is far ahead. Indeed, for all the sins of Mr. Mahama, for all the criticism that was rained on him, today we've heard all of your anti-corruption crusaders, for example, Manasseh Azuri-Awuni, who has spoken extensively about the transparency with which Mr. Mahama handled all of these corruption issues that came up under his watch. Indeed, you remember that Jida in particular was actually tried and tested, and all the persons who were involved, some were actually even sentenced. You know, look, I have no doubt, I remember even in some cases where there was an attorney general was actually asked even to report on a matter, to generate a report. Mr. Mahama handled corruption very swiftly. He himself allowed himself actually to be investigated by Shraj at the time. And you were all witnesses to this matter. Do you ever recall Mr. Mahama deciding to hide any report that came from the Commission on Human Rights and Administration Justice, for example? No. Do you remember a time when journalists were, look, today we have the Right to Information Act, a legislation that was passed as part of the actions by President Akufo-Addo to show that he was fighting corruption. We have the Office of Special Prosecutors Act, and look at the conversations we are having. We are not saying it. The first special prosecutor whose announcement was greeted with enormous pomp and pageantry, look at how it ended. The former Attorney General, the Honorable Gloria Akufo, look at how it ended. Today, they have frustrated the current special prosecutor to the extent that presently he himself is under impeachment proceedings based on a petition from the first special prosecutor. Aisha, Mr. Mahama has indicated that his administration was not perfect. He has also admitted that the criticisms that were directed at his administration were largely unfair. Indeed, today we have Transparency International that has actually clearly stated that Mr. Akufo-Addo has made no attempt whatsoever. Look, I myself was a good example. Everybody went on and on about family and friends, and it was always just me. People sometimes forget that my father was a very distinguished member of the National Democratic Congress, and that I have always been a proud member of that party. And yet, the minute Mr. Mahama appointed me to the lowly position of a deputy transport minister, a role I was well qualified for, look at the sort of criticism that one single appointment received from our then opponents. Then candidate Akufo-Addo told us very boldly that if you were coming into his administration to make money, then find another job. He told us that he was so old that he wasn't coming to steal our money. His then candidate and running mate told us all the tales about what they were going to do to fix the economy and why they thought that they were much better. Today, sadly, you and I know, and I don't want us to belabor the point, that corruption is at an all-time high, that the stealing is now so endemic that everybody has stolen so much, we don't even know what else to do. Indeed, everybody fighting corruption is being fought from the Malevo to all the other people. Even today, as we speak, the special prosecutor is being fought because he was actually appointed to come and taunt and harass members of the National Democratic Congress. And now that he has fallen on his own sword of Damocles because President Akufo-Addo's own appointees have themselves been mopped now in so much corruption to the utter embarrassment of the appointing authority. You know, Mr. Mahama was in office when he was hounded out, criticized by these same people. Mr. Ahiagba, I remember him jumping and all over the place about how Mr. Akufo-Addo was incorruptible. He was going to run an administration that will fight corruption. They raised and published almost every little issue that happened under John Dramani Mahama.
Thankfully, Mr. Ahiagba is here. I'm bringing Mr. Ahiagba in.
If we're going to apply the same rule, apply the same stringent measures, this government should have collapsed by now under the weight of corruption and conflict of interest matters. Indeed, Mr. Ahiagba should be ashamed of the party that he serves.
Mr. Richard Ahiagba, your government has had several instances of corruption allegations and attacks on government appointees. I mean, the former president mentions the SML deal, the PDS deal, the Ameri deal, and a lot more. He will be asking for accountability if given the nod. Why shouldn't the people believe Mr. Mahama on this promise?
Well, Aisha, thank you very much, and good afternoon to my sister who is looking very good. I just hope that she would agree with me that the former president is not convincing. He's not convincing anyone, not even my good sister, that he is going to fight corruption. He's not convincing anyone. He didn't sound convincing at all. The key is that there is evidence before us that from his administration that he led, people have been convicted for corruption and corruption-related activities. That's fact. That is separable from allegation. Because where we sit now, I can throw allegations at any number of people. But what is crystal clear is that former President Mahama's administration was riddled with corruption.
So that's Richard Ahiagba, who is NPP Communications Director. There's a bit of a connectivity problem. Right, so he's back.
Joyce, hello?
Go ahead, Mr. Ahiagba.
My sister Joyce is a lawyer, and she understands these things. Where there is no evidence and people are throwing, allegation up and down, she cannot accept that to be evidence and material such that, people be convicted or people be hounded and be labeled as corrupt because somebody decided to say they are corrupt. Every corruption and corruption-related allegation under this government were duly investigated, reports were brought, where there were evidence for people to be, prosecuted. I'm sure that would have happened, but there hasn't been a case, okay? If there are cases where people are found guilty to be prosecuted, this administration is the first. I recall, I think this was in 2018, the president, having given a press conference at the Jubilee House, made the point that somehow people are in a hurry to say, oh, lock him up, or prosecute this person. But it's when you are at the receiving end of that, you want the due process to be accorded you. The thing about corruption is that you cannot see it visibly happening. So you need those to be investigated, and nobody, not you, not my sister Joyce, not anybody, not even the former president himself, should be labeled corrupt just because somebody says so. That's political language where people go about and say, so this is corrupt, that's corrupt. The only corruption that we must agree at any given time that has happened is corruption that has been tried. People have been tried and convicted of corruption. Presently, in this government, I don't see that evidence, but what there is really people just making allegations. And so my sister should take a chill pill on the matter of Akufo-Addo government will collapse, corruption and all of that. There are strategies by the NDC to just throw mud at the government just because it is politically allowable.
So for a deal like the SML deal, for instance, where an audit has been done by KPMG, why is the president not releasing the report for the public so we can actually corroborate some of the things you're saying?
Well, I mean, I think that part of the RTI law, there is a preclusion giving the nature of the report that because it was meant for the president's part of his work cannot be released, but the specific aspects that are allowable, or in fact the president being useful for the community, the public for processing what has happened, is released. But you see, we need to underline something. In relation to the SML situation, it wasn't a case of corruption or no corruption, right? It was a question of whether or not there was a business case.
And it was a question of how much the country is losing, remember?
No, but how much? No, so you see, and this is part of the lack of clarity on the matter. The SML deal, my understanding of it is that it was a revenue assurance contract, which is it's a risk invest contract for the SML, such that they will invest the monies to be able to save government the revenues that are leaking through the transportation of downstream petroleum. And if they were able to save any revenue, if they're able to get government any additional revenue, they will take a percentage of that, which is 0.05%. Now, they were taking all the risks to do that. Now, the course of the investigation is to ascertain whether other levels of control are not already performing that role. So it wasn't a thing to say that it's a corrupt activity that was happening. It was only to ascertain, do we need SML? And the question from KPMG, the answer from KPMG's report told you clearly that they have saved government money on the basis of which to say that there is a case to be made that SML came and government increased revenue. That for me is the basis. So the idea that government president hasn't released that report has nothing to do with corruption at all. It only has to do with the limitations of the RTI law, and the president was generous enough to bring a significant portion out.
The anti-corruption agencies are unhappy with this stance by the presidency. But let me give you a minute, Joyce Bawumia, to just to respond.
One second, quickly.
Okay.
So, you know, on the issue of the anti-corruption agencies being unhappy, I can understand that. But you see, what they ought to understand is that it's not the president. It is the law, it's the RTI law that allows that liberty. So president can use it, any other president can use it.
All right, so let me bring in Joyce, your response to Mr. Ahiagba. Just a minute, please.
Well, Aisha, I'm sure you can tell that Mr. Ahiagba really has no defense. He has nothing appropriate to say in response. Basically, he admits that Mr. Akufo-Addo is only hiding under a certain legality, trying to clothe it with a legality that is unnecessary. In the interest of transparency and accountability, we will expect that such reports will be made public. Then secondly, I believe that Charlotte Osei was sacked for breaches. These breaches were under what? The Procurement Act. So if there is any contract, any award of same that is done through a sole source or restrictive tender, etc., that was not transparent, that wasn't done through a competitive system. Indeed, we are told that 85% of government contracts currently are actually single source contracts. You've heard about the brouhaha over the Senate hotels and who is going to stand to benefit from them. Look, in any jurisdiction, huge and high numbers of conflict of interest situations themselves. Breed what? Corruption. Create the impression of corruption, create the perception of corruption, indicate that this government is actually a completely corrupt administration. That is
I'm
what
grateful
it means.
for your time. Joyce Bawumia.